then an eyewitness, was also the result of the attainments of the beings, members of the learned society Akaldan, which was formed on the continent of Atlantis before the second great terrestrial catastrophe. I think it will be best if, before continuing to explain to you further about the mentioned observatory and other constructions erected there for the welfare of being existence, I should tell you, even though briefly, about the history of the arising there of such an indeed great learned society consisting of ordinary three-brained beings, as this learned society, Akaldan, then was on the continent of Atlantis. It is imperatively necessary to inform you of this because, in the course of my further explanations concerning these three-brained beings of the planet Earth who have taken your fancy, I shall in all probability have to refer more than once to that society of learned beings there. I must also tell you about the history of the arising and existence of that society there on the continent Atlantis, so that you may also know that if the three-brained beings there on your planet, thanks to their being particular duty, that is to say, thanks to their conscious labors and intentional sufferings, ever attain anything, then not only do they utilize these for the good of their own being, but also a certain part of these attainments is transmitted, as with us, by inheritance, and becomes the property of their direct descendants. You can perceive such a law-conformable result there from the fact that although towards the end of the existence of the continent Atlantis, abnormal conditions of ordinary being existence had already begun to be established, and that after the second great catastrophe they deteriorated at such a rate that they soon finally crushed all their ableness to manifest the possibilities proper to the presences of the three-brained beings. Nevertheless, their attainments of learning passed by inheritance, at least partly, even though mechanically, to their remote direct descendants. I must first tell you that I learned about this history thanks to what are called Teleoki Nuras, which are at the present time in the atmosphere also of that planet Earth of yours. As you probably do not yet know exactly what a Teleoki Nura is, try to transubstantiate in the corresponding parts of your common presence the information concerning this cosmic actualization. A Teleoki Nura is a materialized idea or thought which, after its arising, exists almost eternally in the atmosphere of that planet on which it arises. Teleoki Nuras can be formed from such a quality of being contemplation as only those three-brained beings have and can actualize, who have coded their higher being bodies in their presences, and who have brought the perfecting of the reason of their higher being part up to the degree of the sacred Martfotai. And the sequential series of being ideas materialized in this way concerning any given event are called Korkaptilnian thought tapes. It seems that the said Korkaptilnian thought tapes concerning the history of the arising of the learned society Akaldan were, as I found out much later, deliberately fixed by a certain eternal individual, Asuchilan, now a saint, who became coded in the common presence of a three-brained being named Tetatos, who arose on your planet on the continent of Atlantis, and who had existed there 4 centuries before the second great Transapalnian perturbation. These Korkaptilnian thought tapes are never destroyed as long as the given planet exists, which is in what is called the tempo of movement of the prime arising. and they are subject to none of those transformations from any cosmic causes whatsoever, to which all other cosmic substances and cosmic crystallizations are periodically subject. And however long a time may have already passed, every three-brained being in whose presence there has been acquired the ability to enter into the being state called subtakalknian contemplation can perceive and cognize the texts of these Kurkaptilnian thought tapes. And so, my boy, I myself learned about the details of the arising there of the society Akaldan, partly from the text of the just mentioned Teliogi Nura, and partly from many data which I learned much later, namely, when having become interested also in this highly important factor there, I made my usual detailed investigations. According to the text of the mentioned Teliogi Nura, and to data which I subsequently learned, it became clear and definitely known to me that this learned society, Akaldan, which arose then on the continent Atlantis, and which was composed of three-brained beings of the earth, was formed 735 years before the second Transopalnian perturbation there. It was founded on the initiative of a being there named Belkutasi, who was then able to bring the perfecting of his higher being part to the being of a saint eternal individual. And this higher part of his now already dwells on the holy planet Purgatory. My elucidation of all those inner and outer being impulses and manifestations which caused this Belkutasi then to found that truly great society of ordinary three-brained beings, a society which in its time was throughout the whole universe called envied for imitation, showed that when this same later saint individual Belkutasi was once contemplating, according to the practice of every normal being, and his thoughts were by association concentrated on himself, that is to say, on the sense and aim of his existence, he suddenly sensed and cognized that the process of the functioning of the whole of him had until then proceeded not as it should have proceeded according to sane logic. This unexpected constatation shocked him so profoundly that thereafter he devoted the whole of himself exclusively to be able at any cost to unravel this and understand. First of all, he decided to attain without delay such a potency as would give him the strength and possibility to be quite sincere with himself, that is to say, to be able to conquer those impulses which had become habitual in the functioning of his common presence, from the many heterogeneous associations arising and proceeding in him, and which were started in him by all sorts of accidental shocks coming from outside, and also engendered within him, namely the impulses called self-love, pride, vanity, and so on. And when, after incredible what are called organic and psychic efforts, he attained to this, he then, without any mercy for these being impulses which had become inherent in his presence, began to think and recall just when and what various being impulses had arisen in his presence during the period preceding all this, and how he had consciously or unconsciously reacted to them. Analyzing himself in this manner, he began to recall just which impulses evoked which reactions in him. And his independently spiritualized parts, that is to say, in his body, in his feelings, and in his thoughts, and the state of his essence, when he reacted to anything more or less attentively, and how and when, in consequence of such reactions of his, he had manifested consciously with his eye, or had acted automatically under the direction of his instinct alone. And it was just then that this bearer of the later Saint